There were 3 ravens sat on a tree. Down a down, hey, down a down. They were as black as they might be with a down. One of them said to his mate, "Where shall we our breakfast take? With a down, derry, 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 down, down."
Hello and welcome to the Three Ravens podcast. I'm Eleanor Conlon and my co-host Martin Vaux and I are tearing away on the back of a giant white horse. In today's episode, we're returning to Oxfordshire and we'll be discovering why you shouldn't go walking with 2 young men at once, who exactly was the Christmas Prince, and why you can't always trust your own horse.
I mean, talking of horse riding, I can't believe how quickly we're galloping through Series 4. It's quite amazing that we're already into the second half of the series.
Yes, and we wouldn't be here without the support of our lovely listeners, on which subject we have some new supporters on Patreon to say a hearty Three Ravens thank you to Renee and Rachel.
All hail Renee, King of Patreon.
All hail Rachel, King of Patreon. If you would also like to support us on Patreon and gain access to lots of most excellent things like ad-free episodes, text versions of stories, exclusive episodes, including episodes of the Three Ravens Film Club, and our monthly newsletter, please consider signing up for just $3 a month or $6 a month at patreon.com/Three Ravens podcast.
Thank you also to our lovely members on the Three Ravens podcast group on Facebook who've been busy voting for us in the British Podcast Awards. If you would like to put in a listener choice vote for us, the address is britishpodcastawards.com/voting. And no, you don't have to be British to cast your vote. Voting closes on the 29th of August, so there's lots of time, but please vote Three Ravens.
We were also super thrilled this week to discover that we are now in the top 200 fiction podcasts in the UK, which is pretty amazing because about 2 weeks ago we were sitting at 221 and now we're at 164, which is quite the jump. And that is really genuinely all down to our listeners sharing the podcast and helping us grow. So thank you. Mm-hmm. It's a new goal I didn't know I had to reach the top 100 fiction podcasts in the UK.
Amazing. Wouldn't that be amazing? Now, we have some exciting things coming up this month, including a new episode of the Three Ravens Film Club. This month, we'll be watching and discussing Ari Aster's 2019 film Midsummer. So if you'd like to join in, give the movie a watch and send us your thoughts by Monday the 24th of June, and we'll include them in our episode recording.
Send them in to us at threeravenspodcast@gmail.com, which is the same place to send your own chilling tales of terror for this year's haunting season. The only rules are that they must be up to 3,000 words and must invoke a sense of horripilation. In other words, scare the pants off us.
Now, the competition will be open until the end of Series 4, so there's a few more weeks to get those stories in. Also, a reminder that there's just a week left before our live stream for this month's Three Ravens Book Club. We're reading and discussing The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo, and we'd love it if you'd join us for some book chat at 7 p.m. GMT on Saturday the 15th of June. I'll put up the link on all of our social medias.
Last but not least, if you'd like to join us for one of our upcoming live shows, do please buy yourself a ticket for Three Ravens Live at Chichester Festival on the evening of Thursday the 4th of July, when we'll be performing our Series 4 finale, all about the history and folklore of Sussex, or for our live show at Battle Festival on Saturday the 24th of August.
Which is all going to be about the Norman invasion, and it's going to be quite funny. Anyway, both shows will feature live music, storytelling, quite a few giggles and a Q&A session afterwards, so do search online and book some tickets for either Three Ravens Live at Chichester Festival on July the 4th or Three Ravens Live at Battle Festival on August 24th for a couple of hours packed with lore, legends and laughter.
So we're releasing this episode on Monday the 10th of June.
June is, as we recently discovered when putting together this month's newsletter, a bit of a wasteland when it comes to saints' days and strange local customs, as so many of them for this month sort of get lumped in together in a grand season of Midsummer over the last few days of the month. So, naturally, I was waiting with bated breath to see what or who Eleanor would manage to dig up. Could it finally be an Eleanor Nothing Day?
Of course not, Martin. Don't be silly. I'm digging up St. Olivia of Palermo. Although, actually, I might struggle to do that, as nobody is exactly sure where her relics are, or In fact, whether she existed at all in a historical sense.
Okay, I hope you can hear my cynicism. So, St. Olivia of Palermo, what have you got to say about it?
Well, Olivia was born in the 5th century in Palermo in Sicily, and she had every advantage in life, including a wealthy family and a pretty face. And she also had an unwavering devotion to her Christian faith.
Well, that sounds as though it's not going to be too advantageous for her, but I also thought you said that we didn't know she existed in a historical sense.
I'm going to cover that.
Okay, all right.
But I'm afraid she does rather fit into the Virgin Martyr category of saints.
Okay, which means she presumably receives quite a high mark in the brutal death category on your saintly scorecard.
Yes. So Olivia went about Palermo doing good works, giving charitable donations, and of course converting as many people as she possibly could to Christianity.
Yeah.
However, in 454, Gaiseric, then king of the Vandals, laid siege to Palermo and arrested and martyred a whole load of Christians. And Olivia, who was only actually about 13 years old at the time, according to various accounts, bravely visited the Christians in prison and encouraged them to stay strong in their faith.
So hold on, she'd been wandering around doing good works, giving charitable donations and converting people before the age of 13.
Yeah.
Okay, just checking in with that. And so, yeah, I'm guessing the Vandals didn't like it very much, this promotion of Christianity.
The Vandals were pretty decent about the whole thing, given that Olivia had probably been making quite a nuisance of herself. Mm-hmm. They didn't add her to the numbers in jail or just martyr her straight away. They actually just banished her to Tunisia, which doesn't sound all that horrible.
No, it sounds like quite a nice holiday in the sun for Olivia.
But she was soon at all her old tricks again, though, and got to work converting people in Tunisia. The governor of Tunisia, who was Muslim, wasn't super happy with this, as you can imagine. So he banished Olivia to the wilds, hoping that wild animals would have her for breakfast.
Double banished. Oof.
This backfired, as animals were just as charmed by Olivia as everybody else, and they lived peacefully around her and brought her food so she wouldn't die of hunger. But then people started to visit Olivia in the wilderness, and then she began to include a few miracles in her repertoire, you know, just your standard healing the sick and suffering, really.
And also, I'm going to presume, converting people to Christianity.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I'd imagine she was also converting all the animals to Christianity, right?
Oh, yeah, this is very much her MO.
Desert foxes and falcons, anything that comes her way. She's like, and you're a Christian, and you're a Christian. Look under your seat. What's there? Christianity. Look!
And that's why all desert foxes are still Christians to this very day. Anyway, the governor wasn't very happy with all of this, so he had Olivia arrested finally and ordered her to convert.
Okay, what's it? Islam?
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Or ideally anything except Christianity, but Islam for the favoured.
Just quit it with the anything but this Christianity.
But she would not. And that is when the governor's patience ran out completely.
I think that's fair enough.
Yeah, so he subjected Olivia to a series of horrific tortures, culminating in her being submerged in a cauldron full of boiling oil.
Okay, I take that back. Not fair enough. That is horrible.
Well, it would have been, but none of the tortures actually caused her any harm. She emerged from the oil unscathed, as one might emerge from a lovely bubble bath, and naturally did not renounce her faith.
She must have been, what, like 14 or 15 at this point in time? Okay. I mean, I can imagine a certain sense of frustration if you are this governor of Tunisia. How do you solve a problem like Olivia, the annoying Christian?
Well, he beheaded her.
Oh, right. Well, hey. And did her head just grow back? Was it recovered by an angel or something?
No, that did the job.
Oh, okay. All right.
On the 10th of June, 463, her soul flew up into the sky in the form of a dove, and that was that.
Hey, mission accomplished.
She was venerated in Palermo, presumably by all the people she'd converted and the desert foxes.
Yes.
But also in Tunisia. And it's possible that her remains are buried under the Great Mosque of Al-Zaytuna, otherwise known as the Mosque of Olive, which archaeologists discovered was built over the remains of a Byzantine Christian basilica.
I bet wherever they did bury her, they buried her deep.
It was buried really good,
yeah, exactly.
Just in case.
That kid needs to disappear from everyone's memories. Keep digging, lads.
Well, King Martin I of Sicily had the temerity to request St. Olivia's relics be given back to Sicily in 1402. But the Caliph at the time, Abu Faris Abdelaziz II, said no. And so, as far as anyone knows, they're still there in Tunisia.
If
somewhere.
she ever existed at all.
Yes, if she existed, which was apparently in some doubt, mostly because her legend wasn't original enough.
Well, I was
That's what
gonna
people said about it.
Like, your last Saints Day was also about somebody being very friendly with animals, wasn't it?
Yeah, and that was the criticism of Olivia, that her life and her martyrdom had too much in common with those of other saints, so she can't possibly have existed.
I don't think that's entirely fair. That can't be right. Like, oh, you did the similar things to the other saints. Yeah, we're all Christians. That's what we do. We go
exactly. I think it's a bit mean. And there's plenty of references to her across culture, including a number of churches being dedicated to her, various lives of Olivia written in prose and verse, including a 17th century poem of 114 octaves. I mean, that feels like a confirmation of existence to me.
There is a big gap between the 17th century and the 5th century, isn't there? You got to concede.
But this wasn't the first.
No.
This was one in a long line of Olivia proof.
Oh, yeah, and ask the desert foxes, right? They'll say, oh, yeah, no, she was
Still
totally
yapping
real.
the Lord's Prayer.
Well, happy Saints Day, Saint Olivia, if you ever existed. Shall we prise the county crier's sticky fingers off that cauldron of boiling oil and get them to ring us into Oxfordshire?
Oh, be careful with that oil. Oh, no. Oh, yeah. Gather round. Oxfordshire is located in the southeast of England. It's surrounded by Buckinghamshire to the east, Berkshire to the south, Wiltshire and Gloucestershire to the west, and Northamptonshire and Warwickshire to the north. The largest settlement is Oxford, which is also the county town. As ever, you can find a map showing the precise location of the historic county on the blog on our website at threeravenspodcast.com.
Now, I remember from last year, there is a lot to talk about in Oxfordshire. Not least the Rollright Stones, and some of our lovely listeners have sent us pictures and accounts of their visits to the Stones with their legends of the Whispering Nights.
Yeah, last year you did manage to cover an awful lot. You talked about the Uffington White Horse, Oxford University and the Oxford Movement, the Cotswolds, Blenheim Palace, the Ashmolean and Pitt Rivers Museums, the legend of the Devil and Barnard Gate, the tale of Blackjack's Hole, and the wonderful tradition of the Horns of Ox Street, as well as treating us to a beautiful and tragic retelling of Lord Lovell's Bride.
And today, you're going to be giving us your take on an 18th century true crime.
Yes, I am. But to kick us off, let's hear from this week's local legend. We were lucky enough to be able to entice the wonderful David Crowther of the History of England podcast. David has been chronologically retelling the history of England from the end of Roman Britain right up to the present day. Do you know where he's got to now, actually, Martin?
Yeah, he's nearly at the end of the Civil War. Well, I talked about this. I mean, it's part of the interview. He's been doing the Civil War for a little while.
There's a lot to say about the Civil War, Martin.
Yeah, I know. And he also acknowledges that your Oliver Cromwell thing is a thing in our interview. But nonetheless, he's been in the Civil War for a little while. I don't know if he's confident enough to actually leave it. I feel like it's going to wind to a close soon. But he says not. He says
it's a great place to stay.
Several more years, he says.
And when you say my Oliver Cromwell thing's a thing,
yes, it is a thing.
Does he mean he's got the thing as well?
He has some sympathies for the Republicans, yeah, definitely. He doesn't like Charles very much.
Excellent. Well, David's podcasts feature that holy grail combination of rigorous research and historical accuracy with an excellent sense of humour and a lively style. So if you haven't yet checked it out, the History of England podcast, I heartily recommend it. It's one of those podcasts that I downloaded hoping it might help me sleep, but it is far too engaging for that and it just keeps me too entertained for slumber.
So I've been listening to the History of England for a very long time. It was lovely to speak to David. He's been really supportive of Three Ravens since we started. And for our interview, I asked him, as he's a local, about Oxfordshire and its unique character. And this is what he said.
Well, we're talking about Oxfordshire because it's the county where you live.
That's
and
true.
I used to live in Oxfordshire, in Charlbury, in the Cotswolds.
Uh-huh.
But I'm interested in your perspective as a resident who wasn't born there.
Yeah.
So, a broad question, but in your opinion, how do you think Oxfordshire is seen by people in England more widely? Do you think they know much about it?
I would have said that that Oxford is kind of the ultimate British brand, isn't it? So
Interesting.
I used to work in assessments, international assessments. So I go around the world trying to sell assessments. And both Cambridge and Oxford throughout the world are seen as, in a sense, synonymous with Britain, which is a bit annoying. ways, because I'd much prefer it to be Loughborough.
Sure.
Anyway, I'm not sure about that actually, but or I don't know, Manchester, whatever. But yes, I do sometimes think that, because I think you said somewhere that on the map it looks like it's in South Midlands, and geographically it probably is.
Yeah.
Culturally, it's the south of England, isn't it?
Yes, people say it is in the southeast.
As culture it is. It's got these posh universities. It's got this lovely, very southern English countryside. I'm not calling it typically English countryside because Derbyshire for me is typical English countryside, not. So, yes, I think that's what it looks like. It looks like 1950s Britain.
Yeah, it does, I think. And Oxford itself, in places, feels like it hasn't changed for a very long time.
It does indeed. Which is a shame, since the other week I went for shopping and they were burning a heretic there, which was I thought was taking things a little bit far.
Well, if they will make trouble, and to be clear, as you say, you are by no means an Oxfordshire expert. That's not what I think we're having this conversation for. But just from your experiences, and particularly for listeners overseas, how would you describe Oxfordshire as a county? Like, what's it like to bumble around in? And would you say, and I think this is a very interesting question in the sense that I've asked it of a few people now about different counties, and it's been curious to hear what they have to say. Do you think it's terribly distinct as a county from the counties that surround it?
I think I'm not sure that it is. I'd like to say it was, because I'd like to speak up for local distinctiveness. I'm not 100% sure it is. A few things on that. In terms of what it's like as a county, to answer that question first, I have found it a lovely and fascinating place to live. For me, the geography of it I particularly enjoy, because it's got these two areas of ancient countryside, the Cotswolds and the Chilterns at its edges, and in the middle it's got this massive Oxford plain, very fertile, lots of agriculture, champion land as it were, and then you've got this capital in Oxford, which is a jewel of a city. Whether you like the British 1950s thing or not, Oxford is a stunner.
Yeah.
A wonderful, wonderful city, not just because it's got these ancient buildings, but also it's a proper city. There's lots of stuff going on. It's not just stuck in its old ways, even though the university is very traditional. It's absolutely lovely place.
And it has the Pitt Rivers Museum and the Ashmolean, which are two incredible places to get lost. Yeah, great.
And it's got the North Wall Arts Centre. It's just, there's loads going on, and it's not just that monolithic stuff. So I think it's a lovely place. But there's a chap called Pythian Adams, he's a historian, who talked about the way that counties are held together in a regional sense. So in a sense, Oxfordshire is part of the sort of Thames Valley thing that connects Berkshire and Oxfordshire and then Gloucestershire. And I don't think any county is that distinctive, with a possible exception of Norfolk. Because I think if you towed the rest of Britain and sunk it and just Norfolk was left, I don't think Norfolk would notice. And I think Oxford, where have they got? We was there a minute ago. I mean, whatever. So,
them's fighting words. Let's see if the people of Norfolk come at you, Mr. Crowther.
I will entirely agree. I'm very confident.
So interesting. I'm really looking forward to the full interview.
Yeah, David and I had a really great chat, and the full Local Legends interview will be out on Saturday for you to listen to and enjoy.
If I were going to give a very brief, potted history of Oxfordshire, I'll try.
Okay.
The county was formed in the 10th century, and before that it was part of the Kingdom of Mercia. And when bishoprics began to be established, it was included in various different dioceses. Part of the county is on the River Thames, so it's always been great land for agriculture, and that is indeed where Oxford gets its name. Oxen afford is a ford for oxen.
And you mentioned that it was in the southeast of England, but it's not really when you look at its position in the country. You said it's in Mercia, but it's kind of central.
It is. It's technically classed as the southeast, but it's not really.
No.
Not like we're in the southeast here in Sussex.
Yeah.
And maybe that's one reason the Romans didn't bother with Oxfordshire at all. Just didn't bother.
Sort of just there in the middle. They're
Yeah.
like, we don't need that bit. If we do all the bits around the outside, they're more
We've basically got it
important.
covered.
Yeah, then what are they going to do? They can't escape.
No, exactly. We've got them hemmed in. Now, the University of Oxford was established in the 11th century, and that's continued to flourish as a seat of learning ever since. Post-Norman conquest, Oxfordshire was transferred from the Diocese of Sherborne back to Lincoln, where it had been once before. And the Bishop of Lincoln at the time had loads of land in Oxfordshire.
Yeah, I mean, there were one or two old abbeys back in the day, weren't there?
Yes, Abingdon Abbey, Osney Abbey, Godstow Abbey, Dorchester Abbey, which is in Dorchester-on-Thames and not Dorchester in Dorset,
No, don't get
confusingly.
confused. Don't
Confuse
get
me.
confused.
There were many. And as we are still, briefly, in the 11th century,
Yeah.
I wanted to draw attention to an interesting archaeological discovery, which was made in 2008 beneath St John's College in Oxford. It was of a mass grave containing the skeletons of 37 people dating from over 1,000 years ago.
Whoa, that sounds pretty amazing. Do we know how they died? Like, what was it for?
We do. Historians think these were some of the victims of the St. Brice's Day massacre in November 1002, which was a killing of the Danish population of Oxford, ordered by Ethelred the Unready, who was, shall we say, a little bit paranoid that all Danes had designs on his life.
Oh my goodness, that's almost like a genocidal act. Like,
Yeah, it was like
Oh.
they must immediately die.
Goodness, that's horrible, but very interesting.
And the skeletons have been found to be of Viking descent, and the dates match, so it is quite likely these were the victims of the Unready's atrocities.
Goodness me. I mean, you've got to wonder how many more there are scattered across Oxfordshire who haven't been discovered yet.
Yes, I do wonder. The people of Oxfordshire need to be careful when doing their gardens.
I presume so. Now, you've already mentioned agriculture. Is Oxfordshire notable for any other products or industries?
Well, good farmland naturally produces good sheep, meaning lots of lovely wool, which was traded all over England. There were also historically industries for salt, plush at Banbury, leather at Bampton and Burford, malt at Henley, and my personal favourite, gloves at Woodstock.
Don't tell me there's a Woodstock finger glove or something like
I
that.
have to look it up to see if there's a special local variant, not like the bolt and thumb glove. Now, we've just mentioned the Civil War, and I've got to say, things got pretty exciting in Oxfordshire during the Civil War. After the Royalist victory at the Battle of Edgehill, Oxford really doubled down on the Royalist cause and became the centre of this strong defensive position, surrounded by Royalist towers as a kind of outer defence. And the main function of holding this area, which, as you've said, is bang smack in the middle of England, was essentially to hold up and annoy the parliamentary army until more royalists could flood in from the north and west.
Yes, and we know that ultimately this strategy perhaps wasn't successful, but in the interim, how well did it work? I mean, I know the answer to this question, but...
Yes, I mean, ultimately we all know the answer to this question. But it did work quite well all through 1643. Until the parliamentarians started to get wise and attack the royalist numbers in a series of skirmishes around the border of the stronghold.
Yes.
But Charles I really liked the idea of Oxfordshire as this central point of military power from which he could sort of strike out in all directions. And it was a super successful strategy for a time.
Yes.
Despite being assailed by the New Model Army in 1645, Oxfordshire's position held firm, and it remained firm even after the Battle of Naseby. Like, hung on even after that. Which, shall we say, was not the Royalists' best work. And the city of Oxford and the surrounding towns of Banbury, Wallingford and others surrendered after that. But it lasted a long time.
But at what cost to the country as well, having, essentially been besieged for that long and clung on for that long.
Well, the county was left in a real pickle, like very impoverished, and it took a while to recover.
Yes, more than just a little battle-weary and in need of cheering up. But one of the interesting things about Oxford and the fact that it historically looks so beautiful when you think about it as like a fortress town, an unlikely fortress town, it's one of the places that Hitler planned to make his capital. So it's not bombed at all. So a lot of the historical buildings in Oxfordshire, and Oxford in particular, they're the same as they were hundreds of years ago, which makes it a really interesting city.
I suppose if you think of it as the heart of the nation, it is in the middle.
Yeah.
Yeah. And it leaves us with lots of lovely unbombed historic buildings.
Definitely true.
Well, if you need a bit of cheering up, get your jingly bells ready.
Oh, yeah.
Because I can absolutely cheer you up with an Oxford spin on the Lord of Misrule tradition.
Oh, well, the Lord of Misrule, in case you're unfamiliar, is this idea where somebody of low status, like a child or a servant, is given ceremonial power over a festival period and might be in charge of some of the celebrations of the Christmas period where things were thought to turn upside down. So power was flipped on its head. So, people who didn't have power were given power. Someone was appointed Lord of Misrule and they'd act like a master of ceremonies.
Well, in 1607 at St. John's College, the same one with the Danish grave,
yes,
the students' celebrations apparently got completely out of hand and went too far. So the college invented a new figure of authority. The Christmas Prince.
Oh, was he like the bad cop to the Lord of Misrule's good cop?
Well, sort of. The Christmas Prince was a rather squeaky clean character who was supposed to keep the festivities from becoming too raucous and make sure everyone was just having good, clean, totally legal fun.
Yeah, I can't imagine that this was a success. Like, the English people famously get a bit rowdy at Christmas.
It was not a success.
Yeah.
The first two Christmas princes, to all reports, actually ran away. But the college caught the second one and made him come back and be the Christmas Prince anyway. Things gradually became more organised after presumably a few miserable Christmases, until the Christmas Prince finally had the power to establish his own Christmas parliament and demand taxes to pay for the celebrations.
Oh, see, this is what happens when the bean counters get to be in control of stuff, isn't it? You can imagine them having some sort of rudimentary spreadsheet that they were working to.
And it really is sucking the joy out of it.
Yeah,
isn't it?
it is. That's no fun at all. Presumably they did away with Christmas princes because, we've already talked about the royalists and the uprisings. Did they behead a Christmas prince? Because I think I might have been tempted after a few brandies at Christmas.
Yes, this was 1607, so maybe they only lasted another 30 years or so.
Yeah.
One good thing the Christmas Prince did was supposedly made sure the students performed lots of plays over the Christmas period, so at least he had a positive impact on drama.
Yeah, that's cool, but talking about Christmas parties has got me kind of craving a mince pie. I don't suppose they originate from Oxfordshire, do they?
I don't think so, but it is certainly time for a new county dish.
So, what gastronomic delight will we be attempting to whisk up in the copper pots of our folkloric kitchen?
Today we are going to be baking Banbury cakes.
And are those anything to do with the Banbury cross and a certain cock horse?
Well, they were once exclusively made and sold in Banbury, where various crosses have been situated over the years. But it's unclear if the cock horse liked or disliked the cakes. Martin is referring to the famous nursery rhyme about the town of Banbury.
Ride a cock horse to Banbury Cross to see a fine lady ride on a white horse. With rings on her fingers and bells on her toes, she shall have music wherever she goes.
Nobody has been able to state with any certainty who the incredibly accessorised lady was, but theories have ranged from Lady Godiva to Elizabeth I to just some local Banbury girl.
I always thought when I was a little boy that it was deeply impractical having bells on your toes.
I assume they were on her shoes.
No, they were on her toes.
The toes of her shoes.
I think she'd have to be on horseback. Otherwise, the bells would all be unable to ring whenever she took a step.
Were you picturing the bells actually strung on her actual toes?
Yeah.
Because I have always thought it meant her shoes.
No, I always thought it meant her toes. So she literally had bells on each individual toe, almost like on rings that dangled off them. I know this has got nothing to do with
really
fancy dishes.
Impractical, and the shoe idea is better.
Yeah, maybe it is. Or she went everywhere on her hands so that her feet could jingle, or like I said, she rode a horse. Those are my explanations. Occam's razor, Eleanor.
Well, thank you, Martin. Occam's razor perhaps needs to go and be sharpened.
Does it? All right.
Medieval Banbury actually had 3 crosses, which could confuse matters when riding a jingly horse. They are actual crosses rather than a reference to a crossroads, which is something else I always thought as a child.
No.
Which I now know.
Yeah, it's nice, Banbury. Don't know if you've ever been.
No, I haven't.
Yeah, it's all right. Yeah, it's not like I go, hey, do you know what will be fun? Let's go to Banbury for the day. But it's the kind of place that if you went, you would go, yeah, this is all right.
Oh, good. There was only one cross, singular, left by 1602, which was then probably destroyed by the Puritans.
Yeah,
Hurrah!
your old pal, the Puritans.
But a new cross was built in 1859 and has stood ever since. So you can happily enjoy your picnic of Banbury cakes underneath it.
All right, enough nonsense. What is a Banbury cake?
Well, it's actually a type of spiced pastry filled with currants and of a distinctive oval shape. They were first made in 1586 in Banbury, of course, and they are still made there today. The recipe was initially kept secret, like all good recipes.
Yeah.
But by 1615, there was a recipe available in the cookbook of the English Housewife, which was this hugely popular collection of recipes and medicines. Many copies were distributed. Like, we would call this a bestseller today.
Yeah.
Modern Banbury cakes probably aren't much like their Elizabethan counterparts. Nowadays, the filling might be nice things like mixed peel, brown sugar, nutmeg, rum, lovely, delicious things.
Yeah.
But in the past, they might have included rosewater, musk, ambergris.
I mean, musk. What's the tang in these cakes? It's revolting. Ah, that, sir, is musk. Yeah.
Yes,
No,
I'm
thanks.
happy they've evolved, and they've evolved these days to become more like an Eccles cake, and they keep fresh for quite a long time, which makes them suitable to be packed in baskets and exported, which they were, as far even as Australia, America, and the East Indies.
Goodness, the exotic taste of Banbury
Indeed.
arriving in Australia. People going, oh, what is this delicacy?
Ah, a Banbury cake
It's mixed peel baked in some pastry, and it's come all this way.
with a dash of musk.
Yeah, with a dash of musk.
It's supposed to be very nice with a cup of afternoon tea.
Yeah.
And Queen Victoria was actually always presented with some Banbury cakes when she travelled to Balmoral every August. So on the way, she'd have some Banbury cakes for the
I mean,
train.
it sounds fine. Like, I'll boil the kettle, but like, how do we actually make a Banbury cake?
Well, we will need butter, honey, nutmeg, cinnamon, currants, orange peel, and then flour and pastry. Either you can make your own or grab a pack of ready rolled like me.
Yeah. Now, just the ingredients make these sound delicious, but I have to say, they do sound quite similar to mince pies.
You're not wrong, actually.
No.
It's funny, you said you wanted a mince pie,
Yeah.
and as we talk about Banbury cakes, there's a certain mince pie-ishness.
They're overly mince pies, right? Is that the idea?
Like, oh, maybe they're flattened mince pies. I mean, so you mix the butter and the honey with the spices and the currants and the peel, and you make a sort of delicious globby stuff.
Yeah.
And then you create...
Filling is the word, isn't it? Not globby stuff. You make a delicious filling.
But I was just imagining the consistency, and globby stuff came to mind. And then you create circles of pastry about 10 centimetres and about as thick as a pound coin.
Sure.
So little coins of delight there. And then you dollop the filling into the circles and then fold up the edges of the pastry so they look kind of like little purses. And then you carefully roll out the pastry parcels into an oval shape.
Right, so
being very careful not to burst.
you almost make a pasty and then roll it flat.
Yeah, exactly.
I mean, this seems like
But you
a
don't want your filling to burst out, so you have to roll it cautiously.
silly process.
And then you just brush a bit of egg white on top, sprinkle some sugar, and bake it in the oven until it's crispy.
I mean, it doesn't sound very complicated, and it sounds very tasty. I just think it's going to taste very familiar. Do you know what I mean? I think these Banbury cakes, they're like, no, they're an original and unique food. Are they though?
An awful lot of these do seem to involve dolloping some delicious spicy stuff into some sort of pastry.
Yeah,
don't they?
I mean, I think that's what kept the English people going for hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of years.
Pastry.
Yeah, pastry. It's what we marched on. Anyway, I'm going to go and make some Banbury cakes, and I'll have them done in time for tea.
It's about time we talked about some folklore. Although, I must say, Martin, you were very thorough last year.
Guilty as charged.
Fortunately, Oxfordshire still has more delights to offer us. Now, you talked about the horns of Ox Street in Abingdon.
And we were actually sent photographs
We
of
were,
them, weren't we? Yeah.
But I have a merry addition to it. Ox Street celebrations surrounding Midsummer also include the election of a mock mayor who's very much like the Lord of Misrule.
Fantastic.
So this would be a local person whose job it would be to kind of embarrass the real mayor and the town council or other important dignitaries if they made unpopular decisions concerning the town.
Now, this is most excellent, and I'm going to presume that they still do this. This seems like they're kind of of thing that the people of Oxfordshire would still be into.
Yes, these days the mock mayor is chosen from the membership of the Abingdon traditional Morris dancers.
Get in.
And the mayor is elected on the Saturday nearest midsummer. After the mayor's election, they're carried along Ox Street on the shoulders of the rest of the Morris side, behind the horns of Ox Street, of course. Horns go first. And they carry a sword and an applewood chalice, which is called the mace.
The mace. Oh, that's really cool. Well, yeah, so as I mentioned, one of our listeners sent us some great photos of the horns of Ox Street last year. If you're planning to attend this year, dear listener, do look out for the mock mayor. See if you can get him to email us or be in touch. And also send us some snaps of your experiences. The Cotswolds are amazing when it comes to Morris dancers. They came up as a topic in my chat with David, actually, and he and I have both had experiences with them, including a rather unfortunate misunderstanding on his part.
The thing that I most remember from Oxfordshire in terms of like folk tradition stuff was Morris men, because it felt like every 5 minutes there was a village fete, and then there they were, whirling away, dressed in pretty wild and confusing things for a child to witness. Sometimes one of them would hit me with an inflated pig's bladder on the end of a stick when I was little, which struck me as, a little bit much. Yeah, a little bit much.
Is it actually a pig's bladder?
Yeah, actual pig's bladder, inflated and dried, with a bit of string coming out of it on the end of a stick that they'd then sort of, hit you with.
That's sad. What a terrible childhood you had.
Well, I mean, there were some highlights, but that was certainly one of the more bemusing moments of them. But, I mean, have you had this sort of experience? Have Morris men attacked you, David? Or have you been whirled up into a country dance even and asked to wangle coloured hankies about in a coordinated fashion?
Okay, well, I deeply regret the country dance thing, because when I was in Scotland at St Andrews University, we did ceilidhs all the time, as it were. And I love country dancing because I hate dancing, but I love it if somebody tells me what to do.
Right.
And then it's tremendous. And that's the answer to the country dances. Everybody can do it. So I regret the fact that we don't do English country dancing anymore. And I'm up for anybody who wants me to invite me along to country dancing. I am there because I love it. And it is tremendous. I have a story about Morris dancing. Nobody used to dance the Morris in Leicestershire. But once I was at the Griffin Inn in Switzerland with my mates. And at the time I was very much against hunting with hounds, which of course they do a lot in Leicester because it's champion the Quorn and all that. And a bunch of folks came up into the pub and I muttered under my breath into my beer, "Murderers." Mm-hmm. My mate Nick said, "They're Morris dancers, David." So I've always felt slightly guilty about Morris dancers ever since. And that is the extent of my contact with dancing the Morris.
Wow, okay. So you've managed to avoid it. And the reason I ask you this question is because I think, again, there's a slight impression that if you're living in the Cotswolds or near to it, then you're just going to be seeing this stuff all the time. But you do have to go a little bit to find it.
That's a feature of the South and Southwest, I think, which I think is very attractive. There is the survival of those traditions are much stronger. And actually, I think a number of folk bands that come from the Southwest, it's very much stronger there. And I listened to somebody called Jackie Oates, who's a local Reading folk singer, actually very good. And she was talking about moving to Devon and how much easier it was to sit in a pub and have people sing to each other.
Yeah, it is very common.
And I would love that. And I regret the fact that it's not very popular around this part of Oxfordshire, to be honest. Although we have a fantastic folk club, Nettlebake Folk Club, just down the road, which I walk to on a Monday sometimes. That is tremendous. So maybe I just need to look harder.
Yeah, maybe it's one of those things that just doesn't rise up and slap you in the face. You just have to maybe scrabble about a little bit and find.
Got to look for that pig's bladder together, yeah.
That is priceless. Now, it is no secret whatsoever that we don't much like Henry VIII here at Three Ravens HQ.
Yeah, boo, hiss, spit. And I have to say, David Crowther does like Henry VIII.
David.
I know.
We liked you so much. So it was to my great delight when I discovered this excellent piece of local law concerning the pond in the village of Ewelme, which is now known as the King's Pool. Ewelme was famous for its watercress pools in the 19th and 20th centuries, and the water in the area, even prior to that, was widely considered to be something special with healing properties. So Henry VIII apparently very much liked to visit Ewelme, And it's been proposed that the healing waters helped with his rather poorly gouty legs.
Yeah, I mean, it can't have helped that much with his poorly gouty legs.
Eased it a little bit.
I mean, if people are unfamiliar, he had a massive septic wound on his legs.
Ulcer, didn't he?
Yeah, lasted for years and years.
However, some stories say that shortly after he married Catherine Howard, she actually pushed him into the king's pool, which is how it got its name.
It's like an act of flirtation.
I think possibly more an act of shut up, Henry.
I feel like that's a dangerous thing to do with Henry VIII in particular. And I'm presuming this is the sole reason that she was beheaded. Do not push the king into the water, particularly when he's wearing his favourite trousers. Unacceptable. Off with her head.
Whether it's true or not, it is a fun story, and I pleasantly daydreamed about Henry VIII toppling into a pond, which is no more than he deserves for dissolving all those beautiful monasteries.
Quite right.
There are some excellent superstitions hailing from Oxfordshire's towns and villages, actually, like this one from Ducklington, where it's believed that losing a milk tooth is very unlucky unless you burn it afterwards.
Burn it afterwards, and I imagine that's probably got something to do with protection from witches. But does that mean that the tooth fairy is out of a job in Ducklington?
You can just imagine her, can't you? Turning up, ready to collect some milk teeth, and they've all been burnt.
Yeah, I also think that's going to smell terrible. I think it's really sinister when you think about, like, little cherubic children going, Mummy, I've lost a tooth. Excellent. Bernard, let's burn it.
Yeah, I can just picture the children crouched over bonfires of teeth. Horrifying.
They save them all up till they've got a goodly number.
That's truly horrendous.
Just do it one at a time. They're like, the annual tooth glaze.
Just as the tooth fairy turns up and is like, oh my God, my livelihood up in smoke.
But also you look at the local listings for what's happening in Oxfordshire this weekend.
The burning of the milk teeth.
Yes, the Ducklington tooth fire.
I also like this one from Lower Hayford, which says that no baby under a year old should be allowed to see its own face in a mirror or have its nails cut, or it'll grow up to be a thief.
Yeah, well, that seems fair enough.
And I think we've encountered slight variations on that one from other historic counties too. But in Shillingford, the long-nailed babies have to stay indoors because it was traditionally believed it was bad luck for babies to be taken outside at all before they were a month old.
Gosh, you have to keep them indoors for an entire month. Also, it's very sinister, the idea of long-nailed babies that have never seen the actual sun.
Yes,
raising
pale,
little
clawed
vampire
creatures.
You're going to have strange kids in Oxfordshire, that's for sure. And I say this as someone who grew up for a goodly share of my childhood in Oxfordshire.
Show me your nails.
I bite mine.
Now, last year, your story was about the historic house of Minster Lovel, Lord Lovel's bride.
Yes.
But just along from there, on the road between Burford and Minster Lovel, there have been reports of a ghostly dark cloud which sort of hovers menacingly over the road there and just instills feelings of terror in all who encounter it.
Oh, that's quite unusual. Like, we don't often come across mean-spirited clouds as ghosts.
Yeah, I thought it was quite unusual.
Yeah.
It's just like a nasty cloud.
That's a strange
You walk
one.
through and you feel horrified.
Horrifying cloud.
That's another one for the local listings.
Yeah.
Oxfordshire is also haunted by many, many ghosts, and a surprisingly high number of them are connected with the Civil War. There are at least 8 distinct hauntings to do with Civil War era deaths or legends.
And I have to say, that only stands to reason. What with all the contention around the Oxfordshire stronghold and all the battles that took place around it in those villages and towns.
Yes. Well, one notable one is the Headless Horseman of Towersey, who was a cavalier who was killed fleeing a battle near the village of Towersey. A rather cowardly cavalier, actually, because he hid in a barn from the pursuing parliamentarians, but his horse betrayed his location by neighing loudly.
I like the idea of a treacherous horse. Like Bevis of Hampton would not be impressed if his horse suddenly chirruped up and went, "He's in here."
No, not in the least. And, Bevis of Hampton loved that horse.
He
but
did.
This horse was a bad character because his rider was hauled out of the barn, shot and beheaded, and buried in an unmarked grave at St. Catherine's Church. History has been silent on the subject of the horse.
I was going to ask.
But presumably it had a smug expression and all the hay it could eat. But his ghost and that of man's worst animal companion can be seen galloping the route between the church and the barn. And to this day, the Towersey Morris side use a headless horseman in their logo.
Oh, I mean, that's very, very cool. I don't think we've ever encountered a headless horseman who hated his horse. And that would suggest to me that they also shot the horse at the same time. So
Maybe they did.
They would end up
Together
being
in
ghosts
death.
together. And then can you imagine that? You wake up as a ghost and you turn to your horse and you went, we'd both be alive if you hadn't betrayed us. You gave us away, didn't you? And the horse sort of shamefacedly going, can horses cry? I'm sure horses can cry.
Oh, I'm sure horses can cry. Unless it was just laughing, going, oh, I never liked the king.
Yeah, exactly. And now I'm immortal in a way. I'm a spirit horse forever. And we're going to just ride around, you and me, Godfrey, forever.
But the pièce de résistance of Civil War ghosts in Oxfordshire is the entire Royalist army.
Say what?
So there is a spot called Froggledown Lane, which is the best name, near Yarnton in West Oxfordshire. And in 1644, it was the scene of a military manoeuvre which the Royalist army attempted to preserve the health of its ailing forces.
Sure.
This was the king's cunning plan, and it involved secretly moving the entire army out of Oxford by a back route in the middle of the night.
No.
And that is what he did.
Right, everyone, we're all going to sneak, and we're all going to be very, very quiet, aren't we? Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
By the time Parliament realised the army had sneaked away, it was in fact too late. Annoyingly, we just missed it for this year, but if you go to Froggledown Lane on the night of the 3rd of June, which was the Great Escape, it's said that you can hear the ghostly sound of the whole army retreating down that little lane.
All the sneaky soldiers.
All the sneaky soldiers tramping and riding and sneaky ghost horses, the whole lot.
I mean, it's implausible. It doesn't make any sense because they wouldn't be dead, but it's very, very fun. Dear listener, if you've ever overheard the entire Royalist army sneaking out the back way down Froggledown Lane, do let us know.
While I was doing my reading, I also discovered an interesting fact. Oxfordshire is the site of many deaths by lightning strike.
Oh, yeah?
Enough to be worthy of note.
Right. Do they have it on signs? Warning, entering Oxfordshire, you may be struck by lightning.
Well, it's warranted a listicle.
That's it.
There are a few good stories, but my favourite one has to be this one, hailing from Ardington near Wantage. A young woman named Martha Warman was out walking with two young men in June 1832.
Oh my goodness, that is shocking behaviour, pun intended.
Well, clearly the divine forces of the universe agreed, because a sudden storm blew up and lightning struck the trio, knocking the two young men over and killing Martha straight away.
Oh, no, they killed the hussy in the scenario.
The local gossip was that Martha had been punished for her immodest behaviour, and they even put a memorial bench up on the spot where she had died, warning other girls not to go walking with two men at once.
We in Wantage are closed-minded. Relationships can only be one man and one woman. So saith the bench.
However, from the accounts of the two men who survived, it was realised that Martha's bonnet had metal wire in its brim to reinforce the shape, turning her into a bit of a human lightning rod.
So it was the fault of what, like bonnet manufacturers?
Yeah.
Oh, no.
Absolutely. Martha could have been with 5 men or no men, and it wouldn't have mattered. The bonnet still would have got her frazzled.
She was a little lightning fork. Poor Martha.
Coincidentally, my story for today is called The Taste of Lightning, and I'll start spinning my yarn right after this. I did it for love. That's all I ever said when they asked me why. Perhaps it's the only reason anybody ever does anything. Afterwards, when the uproar had died down a little, and there was only the waiting, and the watching of the bare walls, and the shadow of the noose, they said I was foolish, misled. They said I didn't know what I was doing. But I did. I did know. That's the part they always found it difficult to swallow. It was June when it started, and it was hot and sultry. The air itself felt languid and sticky. Even the breeze couldn't shift itself to shake the trees. Sweat made my silk gown stick at my back and under my arms, and sweat ran down behind the busk of my stays. The waters of the Thames, which ran through Henley like a sleeping snake, were thick with dragonflies, their wings the colour of fireworks. Wherever you looked, they were on each other, coiled around each other even in flight, as if the hot weather had driven them mad for it. The snake was sleeping then, but it was ready to uncoil itself and slither into life. The journals and pamphlets my father subscribed to talked of scientific discoveries, the secrets of nature constantly being revealed. In America, Benjamin Franklin had used a Leyden jar and a kite to prove that lightning and electricity were the same. God's fury, created and trapped in a jar. That's how I felt too, as though electricity was running across my skin, sparking at every touch, a current. I was ready to split in half with it. I was like a boil, ready to burst. I was 30 years old, and I'd never been touched, except by my own inexperienced hands. There had been suitors, but none had been good enough for my father, who thought that because we had something of an estate, we could do better. He might have been partly to blame, because he gave it about that there was more of an estate than there actually was, although we were comfortable enough, and I had gowns and gloves and feathers to an extent which was almost ridiculous in an unmarried woman. My father's choosiness wasn't the only problem. I'd never seen anybody I really felt anything for. But by high June, when the grass was long and the warm evenings were longer, I would have taken anyone who slid me a sideways glance. It was at a dance in the town hall, when the boat of fate pushed out from the riverbank for good. My father was talking with General Kerr, his closest confidant, so I could dance as much as I liked. I could only join in the country dances where you didn't need a partner, but that was enough for me. I threw myself into the turns and twists, not caring that my ribbon skewed sideways and my cheeks turned to apples in the stuffy room. I could feel the rhythm of the fiddles deep down in my bones. The music got into me and wormed its way down under my skin until I was nothing but music and shimmering heat like the haze over mill meadows. I'd close my eyes and tip back my head when I felt a touch on my hand. When I opened my eyes, there he was, and I felt it between us like an electric current. I thought he'd come to take my soul. I really did, for a moment, because his eyes were all black, or so they seemed. Later, in the light of day, I saw they were actually very dark brown like treacle, but they seemed black, in the centre of that frivolous country dance, black like the shadows in the corners of the bedroom. I couldn't look away from him. Lightning split me in two, and I wanted nothing more than for it to strike and strike again, splitting me over and over. I was a moth flying too close to a candle. But I didn't worry about getting my wings singed, because I was already on fire. The fire raged through me the whole night. I couldn't sleep or cool my skin, even though I sat by the open window and smelled the jasmine in the garden. I wondered if I would ever see him again. I knew nothing about him beyond that he was a captain, because that was how he'd been dressed, and that his look had knocked the thin skin from the boil and let out the hot frenzy beneath it. The very next day, General Kerr called. And who should he have with him but my captain? To my extreme delight, General Kerr actually knew him. He was an offshoot of the Cranston family, descended from a Scottish lord. His clothes sat on him perfectly, as though they'd been moulded onto his body. The stillness about him. How could he maintain it? I was trembling like a mouse in a trap. He smoked a pipe, I wanted to become the smoke from that pipe and crawl down his throat. My father had never given his leave for a man to court me before, but he was in a good mood that day. An open, expansive mood which reminded me that he had once been a generous man. It helped that the captain came with General Kerr's approval, for my father looked to General Kerr in most matters of taste and proceeding. In truth, I think the captain charmed him as well. He could speak on any topic, and when he asked my father about his learned books and papers which sought to expand man's understanding of the world, they almost became friends. We walked together. We went into shops, and I came away with loops of coloured ribbon wound up like tiny grass snakes in my purse. He liked to buy me little things like that, little love charms. He took me out rowing on the river, and the Thames sang a sweet song around us. I took off my glove to trail my fingers in the water and cool them, for the day had become hotter and hotter. When I pulled it out, dripping, his grip on the oars slackened, and he took my hand all wet with river water and kissed it, despite the mossy underwater smell clinging to my fingers. A man had never touched my hand before. Blackbirds were singing their hearts out in the trees, and I was in heaven. I said yes before he ever asked me to marry him. I said yes with my soul when I looked into his cold, dark eyes. I said yes with my heart when he offered me his hand. If I'm perfectly honest, I said yes with my whole body, one long twilight down in Mill Meadows. I didn't care about planning the wedding as much as I should have, probably. I cared more for afterwards, when we'd be alone together in the new house in town General Kerr had managed to procure for us to live in when we were married. I couldn't quite imagine myself living in it. Not yet. It was as though the Mary who lived in that house, a respectable married woman, was another Mary. And the Mary who was me was only a thing of feeling, like a frog in an experiment twitching and trembling with electric currents. He and I were in the garden, concealing our kisses behind the currant bushes one afternoon, when we heard my father's voice summoning us. General Kerr and he was standing in the drawing room. We could see them through the open window, and their faces were more suited for standing at a graveside than a forthcoming wedding. It was all reprimands and recriminations then, for what should General Kerr, that nosy old fool, have discovered? He'd written to Scotland, where my captain came from, the home which had given him a voice like smoke and pine forests. Nobody had asked him to. He'd taken it on himself to meddle and poke in his ancient nose where it wasn't wanted. His letters were full of the pointing fingers of accusation. My captain was married already. He had a wife. How does it feel to lose everything? I should have seen it coming as summer's heated air grew heavier. Those nightmares I had, storm nightmares, thunder that didn't come nightmares. I should have seen that it would all be cracked open. Oh, I was angry, believe me. I didn't just roll over and accept it. I was so angry. When we were alone, I gripped him tight, pinching his arms. I was so angry, I didn't care if I hurt him. My nails left scarlet moons pushed into his skin. He told me it meant nothing. That he'd been tricked into it when he'd been too young to know any different, that their life together had been cruel and loveless, and that was why he'd left. He told me that he would travel back to Scotland, get the marriage annulled so he was free to be with me. He would have done it already, he said, except for that I'd caught him, like an adder in a snare, and he couldn't bear to make the journey and be parted. He gave me a brooch, an oval of Iona marble, pale green like poison. He had it in his coat as though he'd been expecting the moment. I didn't want a brooch. I wanted a promise. and when he gave it, I loved him more than ever. He went, and the days passed, and then he came again and he said it was over and that the marriage had been dissolved. Our house went back into wedding planning, to ordering pies and stitching nightgowns for my trousseau. But General Kerr, that old busybody who sent and received letters like flocks of birds, he came back to my father and told him that the captain was lying, that the marriage hadn't been annulled after all, and that it would be illegal, immoral, and downright inappropriate for the captain to marry me. My father closed our doors and forbade him to come to our house. The pies were cancelled and the lace-trimmed nightgowns put away. Most people would have ended things in their own hearts then, but not me. I wasn't angry anymore. I'd sailed too far down the river and I didn't care. All that interested me was that he wanted me now, not her, and that I wanted him. I would have run away with him. I didn't need to be his wife. What was a wedding, after all, but a stuffed goose and some wreaths of flowers? It seems shocking to say, but I would have gone to the continent with him and lived with no ring, no priest. I would have gone anywhere with him. That taste of lightning was like the need for tobacco for me. My father knew it, and he locked the doors, both to keep the captain out and to keep me in. We couldn't see each other, and though poems and songs are written about how tender it is to suffer in separation, I didn't think it so. I was still aflame, and only the sight of him and the taste of his lips would douse it. So we wrote to each other. The chambermaid thought it romantic to slip his letters under my door and carry my messages to him in her apron pocket. I couldn't keep his letters, of course. I had to burn them. Burn them. They almost set fire to themselves with the things they said and promised. But I memorised every loving line before I turned them into ashes. I still remember them now, even though it's all over. One day he sent me a parcel, not just a letter. The tale the letter inside span was like the silk thread of an old story. The prince meets a kind enchantress who helps him win the love of the princess. He'd met a cunning woman, he said, who'd sold him a potion. It was like a love potion, but rather than seducing someone, it would help to soften a hard heart. A hard heart like my father's. That's what the letter said. I committed it to memory, like the others. And people have said that I, poor, idiot, love-struck woman, believed him. Believed that the soft, white powder like fresh snow was really a magic potion. I did know, though. After all, I'd seen the cook use similar for rats. It was shocking, perhaps. But love makes us do strange things. In the end, it was that I couldn't bear the idea of being without him. That was stronger than blood, stronger than morality. Subtle I was, so subtle. I put it in my father's wine, but only when he drank with others. When he was sitting and talking with General Kerr, I arranged it so I poured both their cups in the room. The powder was concealed in a twist of lace in my sleeve, but I let it fall only in my father's cup before I served them. It looked as though they had exactly the same. I could have told myself all along that I thought it was a love potion. But when my father started to lose weight and look grey, I knew exactly what I was doing. A few nights like that, spread out over a week or two, and he was in bed and the doctor sent for. Doctors. They're curious by trade and suspicious by nature. They can't resist a cup of wine with the servants when they've been and done their examinations, and this doctor was no different. He sat down and made merry, and soon enough that very same chambermaid who'd carried messages to my lover was telling him all about the way she'd witnessed me grinding a strange powder to fine grains, twisting it up in little bits of lace. It was my guess. She fancied the doctor for herself, and thought she'd get his attention with gossip and secrets. I had never trusted other women, and that just confirmed it. Women put love first, not each other. Maybe it was too late for the chambermaid and the doctor, just as it had been too late for me and the captain. It was too late for my father, too. He was dead. There was no time to write to my captain from Henley. They locked me in the house, but I climbed out of the window and threw myself into the currant bushes in the night, some money and jewels wrapped up in a stocking. I did all right. I made it as far as the Little Angel Inn over the border to Berkshire. There the innkeeper lived up to the name of his establishment, for he was an angel to me. Seeing my distress, he was soft and kind and let me have a room, even though I was a woman alone, arriving in the dawn light like a messenger with bad news. His wife wasn't so sure. I could see it in her pinched look as he carefully took my hand to help me up the stairs. It wasn't any real surprise to me when she was the one who told the officers of the law I was sheltering there. It traced me all the way from Henley. I left a letter for my captain, which I hoped the innkeeper might send, but I didn't know if he ever got it. I'd never been as far as Oxford, but that was where they took me. A castle was a fine thing until you were shut up inside it, and the castle was where I stayed until they'd found their proof. Another doctor, an Oxford man called Sir Anthony Addington, he cut up my poor father like an experimental frog and read the tale his insides told him. He found the traces of the love potion I'd slipped into my father's wine, and he told the world the thing I already knew. It was arsenic. 13 long hours the trial took, and I stood in my own sweat until I was nearly fit to collapse, but I said nothing. I kept my silence, for I wouldn't implicate my captain, though they called General Kerr and the household to try and name him in the business. But without any proof of his involvement, they could do nothing, for I had burned his letters. He stayed away, all through it, and I was glad, though I wasn't so stoic I didn't keep my mind from imagining his face in shadow at the back of the public gallery. Those tar-black eyes. The storm broke the night before, and it felt as though the waiting was finally over. The rain came first, soft, like little fingers tapping on the glass. After, the clouds parted, and the lightning made the fine hairs at the crown of my head stand up straight as the spires of Oxford. On my last morning, a cool breeze danced lightly across the courtyard of the castle. A blackbird perched on top of the gallows, and she sang a song for all prisoners who know that their freedom is about to come. It was death I came there for, but it was love which filled my soul. That's why I did it, after all. So, Martin, a little dip into the world of true crime for me for a change. Normally you have that covered with something wicked. So what did you think about the story of Mary Blandy? Sad or not so sad?
Well, I mean, I'm presuming she's a ghost now, right?
Yes, so she was a real person. This all is a genuine story, what actually happened.
Yes.
And Mary Blandy's ghost does haunt various locations across Oxfordshire, actually.
Oh, is she one of those people because she had a widespread reputation, i.e. there was a big scandal about it? Or
Yeah, I think so. Well, she's meant to haunt Oxford Castle, where she actually died and she was incarcerated. But she's also meant to haunt the banks of the river near the Little Angel Inn in Berkshire, as well as Henley, where she lived.
That's very interesting. I mean, I thought the way your story unfolded, it wasn't until quite near the end that it became apparent that, oh my goodness, she's a dead narrator. Like, she's not escaping from the noose that you alluded to at the beginning.
No.
And then I found, as I was listening to her speaking, you did a really interesting job of capturing the quite seductive nature of psychopaths, actually, because she didn't seem wholly unreasonable for a lot of her story. Like, you could understand her perspective through most of what she did.
She's quite sharp. She sees what's going on.
But there were a few points where I was like, no.
Mary, no.
We are crossing some
Mary.
lines, Mary Blandy. This seems like a bad idea.
Well, after they had this trial and after her execution, there was a kind of strange attempt to rehabilitate Mary Blandy and to say that she'd been tricked by this conniving captain.
Yeah, well, he is from Scotland. I mean.
Yeah, and he vanished after the event. But to say that, she really did think it was a love potion. But I felt like that wasn't interesting to me.
No.
Just a girl being tricked wasn't interesting to me. And she wasn't a young girl. One of the interesting things about the story is that Mary Blandy, for this period, which is 1750s, she was absolutely on the shelf. She was 30 years old.
Yeah, she was over the
unmarried.
hill.
Yeah. And there's quite a nice portrait of her. And she doesn't look unattractive, but I think it was generally accepted she wasn't a great beauty.
Sure. I mean, there's an aspect of the story that reminded me a little bit of the true tale of the poison pen letters that recently were turned into that quite funny film, Wicked Little Letters, with Olivia Colman.
Definitely. There's an aspect of that sort of grown-up child who's stuck at home with their overbearing parents.
Yeah.
Who just needs to do something, anything, get me out of here.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Very
and
interesting.
Like, if it hadn't been that man that danced that night, it would have been something else.
It would have been something else.
She would have snapped.
I mean, that's the nature, I think, of your narrator. Like, in a way, she's describing things in a beautiful, poetic way, but also she sounded a bit crazy.
Well, I was very excited when I discovered that 1752 was actually the year Benjamin Franklin managed to harness lightning to a kite.
Yeah, you do like a lightning story as well, like your award-winning poem, Phyllis and the Lightning.
I do. I'm really into lightning, apparently.
You're into lightning.
Just really like storms.
Still, I thought it was really interesting. I think it's interesting also that we both wrote ghost stories for our respective Oxfordshire episodes.
Well, there's an awful lot of them.
Yeah.
An entire army's worth.
And I think it's also, as we sort of wind up on the topic of Oxfordshire in a general sense, curious that the history of Oxfordshire is a little bit patchy in a way. Like, up until you get the establishment of Oxford and the growth of that industry and wool and a kind of medieval boom, there isn't the ancient past in a developed way that we often find in Three Ravens that feeds into folklore in a very significant way.
Yeah, you're right.
And it's also lost out a bit because of border changes. But yeah,
Yes.
I do feel like those ghosts have things to say about the trauma of the county.
Absolutely. And, this was a big scandal at the time, this trial. There was a lot of media attention, as we'd call it now. And the guy they got to do the inquest, Sir Anthony Addington, is sort of credited with, like, a very early forensic, because he, cut open the father, Francis Blandy, to examine and found these traces of arsenic in residue. So it was quite interesting for the period.
Very interesting. Well, there will be more discussions of arsenic and poisoners on this week's Something Wicked episode.
Fantastic.
So that's to be explored in a bit more depth.
Excellent. Well, shall we talk correspondence?
Yeah, it's probably that time. And we'll start with dire news, Eleanor.
Oh, no.
Another week has passed without a new review on iTunes or Apple Podcasts.
Oh, no. We're in an Apple Podcast slough of despond, aren't we?
Yeah, we are a bit. So, dear listener, please, wherever you listen, if you can find it in your heart, do write us a review. It will help other people find Three Ravens, help the podcast to grow, and we will read your review out. So go on, do it. You know you want to.
Surely our friends on Spotify have written us some episode reviews.
Yeah, they sure have, and
Yes.
very nice ones too. For example, on their recent Three Ravens Bestiary episode about goblins, a listener whose name doesn't appear. They're a mystery, and I quite like that they're
Maybe
a
they're a
mystery.
goblin.
Maybe they are. Still, they wrote, fabulous episode. So much work obviously went into this. It's like a fascinating goblin PhD. Thank you.
I wonder if we could offer a kind of PhD in goblinology. I'm seeing opportunities for a little side hustle here, Martin.
No. Eleanor, we do not need any more side hustles.
You say that, but I'm not so sure. Goblin Uni.
No, stop it. We also had lovely comments about last week's Nottinghamshire episode from John, who wrote, "Fantastic, as always, reminded of your Merlin falling through time tale," which I liked very much. Plus, Lissa wrote, "Nottinghamshire pud sounds delicious. I love the idea of all the robins through time and space. And yes, it is high time for a new one."
It is high time for a new one. Thank you, Lissa and John.
And Viv also commented on that same episode, writing, "Loved this, so interesting, and think I'll have a go at recreating the apple pudding. Brilliant take on the Robin Hood legend by Martin too. Keep up the fabulous work, Three Ravens."
Well, that is very nice and interesting that listeners are up for having a bake of a Nottinghamshire pudding. It does sound like one of the nicer county dishes, I think.
Yeah, I think so. Better than pickled pigeon.
Yeah.
That's for sure.
Although, if anyone does have a go at making any of the county dishes we've spoken about across the series, do please send us photos for sharing on social media. I mean, if they're photogenic. Some of the things I've attempted have turned out looking like lumps of messy pastry. But the recipes for each and every one are on the blog at threeravenspodcast.com.
We also had a lovely message this week from Dylan, who'd been to have a look at some of the Burke and Hare exhibits and materials in Edinburgh off the back of last month's Something Wicked episode. He sent some great photographs, including of the books made of William Burke's skin and of tons of fascinating memorabilia as found in the White Hart Inn. You can check them all out on Dylan's Instagram, which is at tales_of_the_otherworld.
Some very creepy stuff there. And do you know, I'm not sure how I'd feel about eating lunch with William Burke's death mask staring down at me, you know? I mean, fair play to the White Hart Inn for going all in on the theme, but maybe not for me.
Also, I would wonder a little bit about ordering a meat pie. You know, just in case.
Yeah, if we do ever go, I'm eating vegetarian. And we also had a lovely message this week from Gabby, who's a printmaker who lives and works in the Cotswolds. She sent us a message to say how much she enjoys listening to Three Ravens while she's making her very beautiful prints. And just to say, your work is stunning, Gabby. Thank you so much for getting in touch, and we really hope you're working on something fun.
I absolutely love how many members of the Three Ravens community listen to the podcast while they're being creative.
Oh, me too.
Yeah.
It's the best.
Whether it's making art or engaging in craft projects or gardening or any number of wonderful things, it's so nice to see and hear what you've been up to while you've been listening to the podcast. Don't ever stop, because all of your messages really do make us smile, don't they?
Likewise, everyone on the Three Ravens podcast group, where we've had so much fun stuff happening this week. We've had the discovery of hidden skulls in holiday homes, to chats all about the amazing Robin Hood related places in Yorkshire, to photos of antique glove stretchers passed down through the generations. It has been a complete delight.
It sure has.
Well, thank you so much, everyone. We always love getting your emails and messages. It genuinely makes our day. So please stay in touch with us, either on social media via the usual channels, facebook.com/Three Ravens Podcast, Instagram at Three Ravens Podcast, or X at Three Ravens Pod, or send us an email at threeravenspodcast@gmail.com.
As mentioned earlier, please keep the entries coming for our Three Ravens ghost story writing competition. And if you'd like to come and see us performing the podcast live, then do buy tickets for our shows at Chichester Festival and Battle Festival.
Yes, please do come and meet us.
Yes, please. It'll be fun. And if you would like to support the podcast and aren't already a member, do sign up to our Patreon for ad-free listening and tons of exclusive content, including our upcoming Patreon exclusive episode for June about the folklore of plants, all available for just $3 a month or $6 a month at patreon.com/Three Ravens Podcast.
And so, Martin, where will we be headed next week?
Next week, we are off to Kent. But before then, we've got a brand new Something Wicked episode all about the infamous French sorceress and mass murderer, La Voisin. Then on Saturday, of course, the full Local Legends interview with David Crowther.
So much good stuff.
So much good stuff. Until then, though, while our story's gone that way, we'll go this way.
And remember, don't whistle till you're out of the woods. Thanks and credit go to Oxfordshire Folktales by Kevin Mannering, the Museum of Oxford, and the Dark Oxfordshire blog. Our theme song is the traditional folk ballad Three Ravens, performed by Eleanor Conlon and Ben Harbour, and our logo is by Ollie James Dare.
The Three Ravens podcast is a Rust and Stardust production, produced by me, Martin Vaux. Thanks for listening.
God send every gentleman Such hounds, such hawks, such lean, with a down, derry, derry, derry.